There's a lot going on in this slide, but I want to focus attention really on those circles toward the middle. And this explains how we arrive at a preferred portfolio that is the best plan for both the integrated resource plan as a whole for all of our states, and in this case, particularly for the clean energy implementation plan for Washington. What we do is we run models with different sets of requirements, assuming Washington requirements, assuming Oregon requirements, assuming requirements for the whole system. And we look for overlap in the resource selections. And that overlap determines really, in a sense, who owns those resources or who participates in a share of those resources. So, for example, if we run a Washington portfolio and it has a certain resource that the model thinks that we need for Washington, and then Oregon has a plan that also wants that resource, the result is that we assume Oregon and Washington are going to share that resource. And it works that way across the states. And so that point in the middle, in the very middle of those circles where it says all share, that is the most common outcome. Most resource selections are desirable under virtually any set of conditions. They are just the best resources. The rest of it, where it falls in this Venn diagram, in those different cross sections, is really determined by what's best for that particular state. And so everybody gets represented. Everybody shares in the things that they want, and some resources will be allocated completely to one state versus another state if it was selected for them and no one else. And that takes me to the next slide, which it may not look like it initially, but it is really a description of the outcome of the slide we just looked at. So you'll see I've got those same colored groupings identified for Oregon, Washington, and the rest of the system. So what this slide is doing is it's saying, you've got the plan, you've got a scheme for overlapping the model results to come up with the share that each state is interested in for its customers. But how did that manifest when you actually ran the model and came up with a preferred portfolio? And that's what this slide shows. So for example, focusing on Washington, those blue boxes at the bottom show you that in our most recent 2023 IRP update, we had 443 megawatts of wind and energy efficiency and demand response resources that are only allocated to Washington. No one else has a share of those. And you know that because the red and the yellow boundaries for the other states do not overlap with those two blue resource selections. You also know that Oregon and Washington share some 4-hour battery, 134 megawatts of it in the year 2029. And that's that little green box where only Oregon and Washington overlap. The bulk of Washington's resources to achieve clean energy implementation planning are those 4 white bubbles in the middle: the solar, wind, storage, and clean base load. And that is where all of the states overlap, and all of them will get a share of those resources. So I hope that that is understandable in terms of how the portfolio gets integrated. It's really a matter of what does every state want, find out where they overlap, figure out how they need to be shared, and then that becomes the plan going forward. I believe that takes us to the next slide, which is simply the integrated resource planning public input meeting schedule. In addition to the 10 currently scheduled public input meetings occurring throughout the process, we have officially scheduled the distribution of the draft IRP on January 1, 2025, which I mentioned, and that's represented here. In order to achieve our objective for that draft, as I mentioned, we have to lock down data and assumptions by the end of September, so that is also noted here. And then we run the model in November and December, and we discuss that as well as we go. So what does engagement look like after September if we've already locked down all of our assumptions and our data? What is it that we're talking about in those following public input meetings? Well, it turns out they're actually very important because either in September or October, we will, for example, discuss which models to run. Because when developing the data, you don't necessarily know what studies you're going to perform. And this is a place where stakeholders can have some input. Uh, we have various price scenarios that assume the economics of energy looks different ways in the future, and we look at each of those futures. We have assumptions like what happens if you assume that we invest in offshore wind? How does that affect the system? Um, we have various models that test what happens if load growth is more or less than we expect. What happens if rooftop solar just really shoots through the roof, no pun intended, and we just have twice as much of it as we anticipated in the next 8 or 10 years. And so it's an opportunity for stakeholders to discuss and suggest what kinds of analysis we will actually perform. We can't do it all, obviously. But we do run a lot of studies, and we also discuss some of the outcomes and results. And there's a whole slew of topics that get covered after the point that we've locked it down, but are actually running the studies. On the next slide, this is really just about awareness of our stakeholder feedback form process. We have updated our stakeholder feedback form. If you've used them before, we've updated them for the 2025 IRP. We only have a couple that we've received up to this point because we've only had a few public input meetings. But this is a place where you can go. There's a link provided there. And there's a form you can fill out to ask a question, make a suggestion, whatever it is that you would like to do. And then we respond to that in as timely a manner as we can. So any questions you don't get answered during a public input meeting, for example, this would be a great place to go to get those questions answered. Note that we will publish those questions and those responses unless you tell us not to. And there's a place on the form where you can indicate that, because we like everybody to be able to see the questions being asked. Maybe somebody has already asked your question, and so you can go online, find those stakeholder feedback forms, and review them. And expanding on that concept of stakeholder feedback, we have our last slide in this section. So if you would move to the next one, this is just additional information to help you. As I already mentioned, the May 2nd meeting is the next upcoming 2025 IRP public input meeting. Everybody's welcome. We have public input meeting and workshop presentation materials available on the website, stakeholder feedback forms that I just discussed. If you want to be on our distribution list and you're not already for the integrated resource planning meetings, you can tag our IRP mailbox. And finally, if you want to look at past reports and supporting studies or past IRPs, you can go out to the website and find all that information there. And I believe that that is the end of my section, but happy to address questions or concerns. And from my team, is there anything that I missed? Okay, let me turn it back over. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy. Thank you. So I recognize here as the facilitator today that we're running slightly ahead of schedule, but I know as we are digesting all of the information we just heard, we should still take a break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break now, which would put us back at 1/4 and we'll come back for the distribution system planning section. Thank you. recorded. The recording was paused during the break, but it has resumed now. And Morgan, if you'll jump to the next slide for us, please. I'd like to pass the virtual presenter over to Ian. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, go ahead to the next slide, please. So yeah, hey everyone, I'm Ian Hugendam. I'm the manager of the distribution system planning team for Pacific Core, and I'm here today to provide some background on the current state of distribution system planning and the future state. So I'll kick things off with an overview of the electric grid and the area the distribution system planning team is focused on. Following this, I'll discuss how the distribution system is evolving and how and why our planning processes are changing. Next, I'll provide an overview of the service area in Washington and some characteristics that are important for distribution system planning. I'll then talk about the current state of distribution system planning in Washington and the commitments the company has made for distribution system planning as part of the CEIP settlement conditions. And finally, I'll present a roadmap detailing our planned engagements for the remainder of the year. Go ahead to the next slide, please. And next one, please.
Ian, while we're changing slides, I just want to call your attention to a question that came in on the chat from Jacqueline Simmons asking if there is a distribution advisor.
We are using this as the distribution advisory group, this venue.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, so the distribution systems planning's primary focus is on the distribution system. This is a system that ensures power reaches the homes and the businesses of a community. However, it's also essential that distribution system planning stays aligned with activities occurring on other areas of the electric grid. So here's real high-level basics on how it all works. Electricity is produced at the generation plants using resources like water, wind, solar, and coal. The generated power travels over long distances via the transmission system from the generation plants to the distribution substations. And distribution circuits are what deliver power from the distribution substations to the customer meters. They primarily consist of poles, wires, and transformers. You can see on the diagram on the right, there are multiple distribution circuits coming out of a single distribution substation. You could think of the distribution substation like a breaker panel in your home, where each breaker switch in the panel controls the circuit serving different outlets and lights. And yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. So the purpose of distribution system planning is to forecast power demand in an area and prepare to implement solutions for future needs and ensure reliable and efficient electricity is delivered to communities. The modern distribution grid has become far more complex with the adoption of new technologies such as residential rooftop solar, electric vehicles, and utility controllable consumer devices like smart thermostats. The Oregon Public Utilities Commission recognized the evolution of the distribution system and proposed some guidelines to encourage advancements into distribution system planning processes. The company submitted a distribution plan in a two-part filing that outlined how the company planned to advance distribution system planning to meet these guidelines. So the second part of the filing was submitted in August of 2022, and since that time, distribution system planning team has been focused on implementing that plan. One of the key changes to distribution system planning is the evaluation of non-traditional solutions to address grid needs. These innovative solutions are beyond, infrastructure upgrades, and they involve utilizing energy programs that influence power demand or encourage generation to be added to the distribution system. So collaborating with communities is now essential in finding the most cost-effective and mutually beneficial solutions for both the communities and the utility. Non-traditional solutions require a more in-depth forecasting process to understand persistence of grid needs and the opportunities to leverage energy programs. Go to the next slide. So here we have an overview of the company's service area in Washington. The shaded areas on the map represent where the company is providing electric service. The company has 33 distribution substations in Washington, serving a network of 140 circuits. And the company maintains and operates around 3,400 miles of overhead wire and 750 miles of underground infrastructure. We serve about 137,000 customers in Washington, with the residential customers forming the majority. 53% of our circuits in Washington have SCADA, which allows the utility to remotely monitor and store load measurements. Currently, our service area in Washington utilizes an automatic meter reading system, otherwise known as AMR. And this is a really big improvement over manually read meters and increases the accuracy by reducing read errors, but its usefulness for distribution system planning is still limited. So a key difference between Oregon and Washington is that in Oregon, Pacific Power has an advanced metering infrastructure system, or AMI, and this is different than an AMR system. These meters provide the company with real-time event notification, an hourly and 15-minute interval demand data, and this kind of data is very useful for various use cases for distribution system planning, including load modeling, model corrections, voltage monitoring, and this data can also augment or even be a substitute for SCADA data in its planning process. So until we have an AMI system in Washington, the granularity of distribution system planning studies will be limited to inputs from SCADA measurements that we have available at substation transformers and circuits.
Ian, can I interrupt you for a moment? We got a couple of questions in the chat over the last little bit that I think it would be helpful to address now.
Sure.
So the first one is from Charlie Thompson. What are examples of non-traditional solutions to DSP?
Yeah, so it's going to be a little different in Oregon and Washington, but in Oregon we work with the Energy Trust of Oregon, and they have a program called the Targeted Load Management Program, where we've been working with them to incentivize people to implement some energy efficiency projects in their area, or provide and talk to the communities about solar adoption and other adopting smart thermostats. And so we've started this optimal time rewards program, and we see that as another way that we can control load behind the meter to help defer some future grid needs on the system. Does that answer the question?
I think that's the start, and this might actually lay into the second question a little bit around, is the company considering AMI for Washington customers?
I don't have any kind of date for when that might happen. I have heard some talks about it, but I don't have anything solid that I can share at this time.
And then I guess the third question, Ian, is do you need AMI to be able to deploy some of those non-traditional solutions that you mentioned?
It helps in determining what the potential for non-traditional solutions is. It doesn't mean that we can't do non-traditional solutions without AMI, but the areas that we are going to be able to study are going to be really limited, and we'll probably need to start with circuits that have SCADA measurements But yeah, it does kind of hinder our ability to define the full potential for non-traditional solutions in an area.
Okay, and I think I've peppered you with all the questions from the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, if you go to the next, just proceed 2 slides. There we go. Thank you. So here are the steps for a traditional 5-year study, and this is the process that's currently being followed in Washington. So the first step is load forecasting, and this involves reviewing historical summer and winter peak loading conditions to determine the load growth rate for each distribution circuit in the study area. So after load growth rate is determined, adjustments are made for any known planned large load or generation additions. The next step in the study process is load flow model validation. And this step involves checking things like the wire size in the model are correct, and that load and generation is connected in the right areas, and that the configurations of the circuit are correct. The next step is after the load flow model has been validated, is to start running simulations of the forecasted peak loading on the model. And this allows us to estimate what the loading will be on all areas of the model, not just the measured points. We run a power flow simulation that estimates how power is flowing on those distribution circuits. And that allows us to determine if there are any grid needs anticipated to the load growth that we forecasted. Some of the typical grid needs that we would find would be equipment that is exceeding its load ratings, or we may find that voltage levels at the end of the circuit are below acceptable limits during peak loading conditions. We'll talk more about some of the other needs in a couple slides. The next step after we've identified the anticipated grid needs is to identify potential solutions to resolve those needs. And we'll talk more about the solutions in a couple slides as well. The final step in the process is to put proposals together for all the projects required to address those anticipated needs. And this includes identifying alternative solutions and documenting the risks associated with those alternatives. The projects then get prioritized and scheduled in the utilities capital plan. Next slide, please. Pacific Power has 13 designated study areas in Washington that are on a 5-year cycle. In the past, these studies have typically taken roughly 2 to 3 months to complete. For the advancements that we're talking about for distribution system planning in Washington, it will add some time to complete these studies because it adds an additional layer to work with the communities to identify the potential for those non-traditional solutions. So in addition to the cyclical 5-year planning studies, there's also another type of study that PacifiCorp performs, and we call those ad hoc studies, or also known as system impact studies. And those studies are conducted when customers that have a significant load or generation that they're requesting to be connected to the system. These studies address the specific area where that connection is being proposed, and if that request would strain the system beyond its design limits, the customer may potentially share in some of the solution costs, but also contribute some input into the solution that's implemented. And unlike cyclical studies, these ad hoc studies or system impact studies are initiated in response to those individual load or generation addition requests. And so they don't follow a predetermined schedule. Next slide, please. So traditionally, the way we've been doing load forecasting, we've been relying on historical trends. We have been making some enhancements to our load forecasting process, and we've been doing that by analyzing some of the primary drivers for load growth. We're evaluating how these factors have influenced past trends, and we're anticipating their impact on future growth. So, for instance, we're integrating weather normalization into our forecasting process now, and we're doing that to account for temperature's correlation with peak load, and weather normalization ensures that our growth rates are not obscured by variations in yearly temperature extremes. Additionally, another thing we're doing is we're assessing policy shifts that promote electrification and things like rapid adoption of electric vehicles. And we're recognizing these as significant drivers for future load growth as well. Next slide, please. So in distribution system planning, we're primarily identifying grid needs into these four categories: capacity, voltage, protection, and efficiency. So capacity grid needs arise when the demand surpasses the capacity of some distribution system equipment. And this can, compromise equipment integrity and lead to failures over time. Capacity is one of the most commonly identified needs in our planning studies. And wires would be a very common type of equipment where we could forecast load exceeding the capacity of that wire. You can see an example of a capacity need in the above graph. So the area above the red line, that load profile, is the persistence of the grid need over a course of a forecasted peak loading day. So when we're looking at solutions for this, traditional solution might be to increase the wire size, which would add more capacity, effectively raising that red line. Where if we were looking at a non-traditional solution, we would be focusing on lowering the blue line by encouraging customers served from that line to participate in various energy programs. Another common grid need is voltage, where deviations from the acceptable range at customer meters can occur. So we try to maintain voltage levels within 95% to 105% of the optimal voltage during normal operations. And as I mentioned before, low voltage could be a common grid need that we find that would, and that could potentially result in non-optimal performance of customer equipment if it goes below that 95% limit. Finally, distribution system planning also reviews system protection to identify needs that result from increasing demand, as well as inefficiencies in the system that can result in avoidable power costs to the utility. Next slide, please. So when we address grid needs, traditional solutions could typically involve upgrades, expansions, or reconfigurations of the distribution system. Equipment upgrades like upgrading wires and distribution transformers are sometimes required to accommodate the projected increases in power demand. In some cases, the new equipment may be required to regulate voltage levels or enhance the system's fault detection and isolation capabilities. Construction of new substations or circuits could be required if power demand or customer numbers exceed company standards, and these types of solutions often are accompanied by another type of solution called load transfers. Some of the more cost-effective solutions that we have are load transfers, phase balancing, or load balancing, and settings adjustments. Load transfers involve moving customers from an overloaded circuit onto an adjacent circuit that has available capacity. A phase balancing or load balancing solution is similar to a load transfer, but it involves transferring customers served from a heavily loaded wire onto an adjacent wire on that same circuit that has spare capacity. And then finally, some for voltage and protection grid needs, we can sometimes resolve those needs with settings changes on protection or voltage regulation devices. And this is often an inexpensive and preferred solution. Next slide, please. One more. So here we see the settlement condition that the company has agreed to. So the company will be incorporating learnings from advancements to distribution system planning that have begun in Oregon and begin to expand these practices as applicable into Washington. So the meeting that we're having today is the first of 4 engagements that we plan to have this year to gather feedback and incorporate into our plan to expand distribution system planning advancements into Washington. Next slide, please. So here is our engagement plan for the remainder of the year. The dates that we have shown here are subject to change, but it is what we have planned for right now. In May, the DSP team will be meeting with EAG members to have one-on-one conversations throughout various locations in the Washington service area. At the upcoming CEIP meeting on May 17th, we'll discuss some of the lessons learned from our experiences in Oregon. We'll discuss how we see those insights being effectively applied in Washington. We'll discuss some of our innovative approaches to non-traditional solutions. These are also known as non-wire solutions, and how collaborative efforts with the communities are shaping cost-effective and mutually beneficial solutions to address grid needs. We will also begin to discuss community benefit indicators and how we plan to integrate them into our planning process. In the August CEIP meeting, we'll highlight some of the distinctions between our service areas in Oregon and Washington, recognizing that some of these differences will shape how we approach distribution system planning in Washington. We'll also begin to discuss resiliency and how DSP plans to integrate it into our planning process. Finally, in October, we plan to go into more details on our roadmap to expand and begin advancements to distribution system planning in Washington. And that is all I have for my section today. I can post in the chat our link to the distribution system planning website in Oregon. It has some background information on what we're doing in Oregon. We also have meetings posted there that we are conducting for local workshops. We have a couple local workshops planned next week in the Pendleton and Wallowa County areas, and those are open to the public. You're free to join. So yes, that's all I have. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. We'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any more questions that appear in the chat. But this was really helpful, and there was a lot of great discussion and questions that came up, which always shows that people are listening to what you're saying. Awesome. Thank you for your time today, Ian. Okay, well, we're going to talk now about 2024 engagement series. And I'm going to welcome to the stage Kimberly, Alejandro, and Stephanie for this section.
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey. Actually, we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And with this slide, we will have Kimberly Alejandro come up and talk through this on the EAG.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jeffrey. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. My name is Kimberly Alejandro. I work for Pacific Power as an equity advisory analyst. The intention here is just to provide everyone an overview of some of the activities taking place within the Washington Equity Advisory Group. We have a schedule here. We try to update it as frequently as new topics and new information emerge, but we also want to be very intentional with the space and carve out opportunities to enhance information sharing as well as educational opportunities to sometimes complex topics. So as you see here, we try our best to balance it out. Our next meeting will be taking place on April 11th. We encourage all participation. If folks are interested in the space or might want to learn more, you can certainly connect with me offline. I would be happy to provide an overview. In April, we will be touching on emergency management and preparedness. This was from feedback provided by our advisory group as a topic that they would want to learn more about. We'll have one of our specialists on the line who's very experienced, especially in the Washington area. We will introduce distribution system planning, so we'll have Ian back. And then we will provide an integrated resource planning update, so we'll have Randy back. In May, we're very excited. A few of us will be hitting the road to visit with our equity advisory group members out in community. We like to do this once a year to really see the geographic area as well as connect with our community partners. We're always trying to amplify the work being conducted out in community. So anything we could do to learn from them and better support their activities will be something that we put in time to do. And as you can see here, we have other items that are emerging and coming within the next several months. So we're really excited. Finally, I'll just say if folks want to provide any input or feedback surrounding how this space could develop even further, we're always welcoming that as well. And with that, I will pass it along to my colleague, Nancy Goddard, to walk us through demand side management. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Goddard. I'm the program manager for our energy efficiency program for business customers, and I also manage our Washington DSM advisory group. As folks mentioned earlier, we have a portfolio of energy efficiency programs to help our customers save energy and save money on their bills. And these programs are how we achieve the energy efficiency targets that are defined in the Clean Energy Implementation Plan and our Energy Independence Act biennial conservation targets. Our goals are to meet both the energy efficiency targets with a cost-effective portfolio of programs and also to increase named community participation in the programs. And we have a DSM advisory group in place to provide guidance and advice as we move through the various processes that we have, the regulatory processes. The advisory group meets at least 4 times per year, and this slide and the next show the 4 planned meetings for 2024. They're in blue font. And also included are the CEIP engagement meetings, such as the one we're having right now. Those are in purple font. And the slides also show the drafts that we'll be sending out to the advisory group for review. Those are in the green font. And we do that so that we can request input before we file those items. Most of the items are filed, and the filings are in the red font. So there's a flow basically to the meetings that revolves around the work that we're doing on achieving our targets and also the planning that we do for the 2-year target cycle. And I wanted to highlight the meeting in May on this slide will include both the DSM advisory group and the low income advisory group, because we're going to be covering a topic from the general rate case settlement on improvements for the low income weatherization program. And you can move to the next slide, please. So this slide has the 3rd and 4th advisory group meetings for 2024. And I just wanted to highlight that for energy efficiency, we file a biennial conservation plan every 2 years. This is was started with the Energy Independence Act quite a few years ago. And that plan includes our 2-year energy efficiency target, which is informed by the IRP that Randy talked about, plus more. And our biennial conservation plan also includes the plan to achieve the target, such as budgets and savings by program and specific details on the programs. And our plan for 2024 to 2025 was approved earlier this year. And the targets for 2024 and 2025 from that plan were included in the CEIP biennial update. In between our 2-year energy efficiency filings, we file an update for the second year. So that's what's going to be happening in 2024 for 2025, which is the second year of the planning of our biennial right now. So on this slide, you're going to see all the work with the DSM advisory group on this. First, we're going to review our programs and propose program changes for 2025. So you see those drafts in September that we'll be sharing and requesting comments on and discussing at the September meeting. And as part of this, we'll be considering ways to increase named community participation, as well as anything we need to do to adaptively manage the programs to meet the 2024-2025 targets that we have. So next, we'll prepare an update to the plan. We already have a plan for 2024 and 2025, but we'll update the 2025 part of that plan. And it'll include our budgets and savings by program and an updated forecast for 2024 and 2025, and those specific program details again. And lastly, I just wanted to say that the slides from our past DSM advisory group meetings are available on the Clean Energy Transformation Act page on pacificorp.com, and we can get you the link to that if you need. And with that, I just open it up for questions, or if we can move to the next advisory group if folks prefer. I'll let Jeffrey handle that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. We'll pause here for a moment just in case, and then having my superpower of getting to see people start to put stuff in the chat is helpful sometimes, but I don't see anyone. So thank you for joining us today, Nancy.
Okay, thank you.
We'll pass the baton over to Charity.
I think I have unmuted. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy Friday. Just an update on the Low Income Advisory Group meeting. On here, I have April 2024 to be determined, but I've just got that meeting scheduled for April 23rd, 2:30 to 3:30. We'll provide an update on the Low Income Bill Assistance Program. We have some discussions on the changes, filing for to change the surcharge, and then also start conversation around the recent stipulations for the Low Income Bill Assistance Program and the Arrearage Management Program outreach, and also changing the logic to our bill discount, where it's applying it prior to the LIBA discount being applied. And so these will start conversations on these and set up a schedule for the year. We are to propose a package by April of 2025 and request commission approval before October 1st of 2025. So I just wanted to provide an update, and I look forward to seeing the Low Income Advisory Group coming up on April 23rd in just a couple weeks. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Charity. And I think our last engagement space goes to Stephanie.
Yes, no, thank you so much. So happy we could have everybody come in and talk about each of their spaces that they have for the advisory groups. I just wanted to also circle back in on, we've heard some conversations on it too, but just to bring forth again, we'll be having CEIP engagements throughout 2024. We have tentatively planned for 4 of them. This is one of the 4. The topics we'll be bringing here are some of them, but this is not limited to only these topics. But we have some of the ones we brought today. We have some others, such as our customer benefit indicators. When we get to the midpoint of the year and we're filing our progress report, there's another area that we could also bring into this space of having the conversation. So there's a lot more information we'll keep providing, especially as we're moving forward with both our integrated resource plan for 2025 as well as our 2025 clean energy implementation plan. Wanted to just call out 2 separately as we had Ian here today. So happy that we're having our distribution system planning engagement starting in this space. And he's also touched on this, that he'll be coming back. We have tentatively May 17th for that next engagement where the distribution system planning will coming back forth, as well as we're looking at August and possibly October or November for that next additional space. And so we're partnering right now with the distribution system planning of being incorporated in this clean energy implementation plan engagement space. The next one I want to bring up is the vulnerable population workshops. This is one of our settlement conditions from our 2021 CEIP. We're going to have 3 sessions, it looks like, for the workshops, and we'll be having in our next CEIP, we'll have either Laura or Lee come forward and give some background and current methods that we're doing with our vulnerable population identification, and really give some content of what that entails and what we're doing currently. The idea is then for that to follow is having break off workshops with just specifically focused in on that vulnerable population discussion, so we could get some feedback and some input. And really working with the subject matter experts, the time that it was needing to have for those conversations looks like it could be a lot larger space of time that we'll need. So we're breaking those off of having those focused so we can have everybody's full attention on those 2 hours. So right now we're looking at an August workshop for that and an October workshop. So we're working on getting those scheduled, and as soon as we have those in place, we will have those listed out on our Washington Clean Energy Implementation Plan workshop website. Sorry. And with that, and I do have the link down at the bottom of the page. And with that, I think we can go to the next slide for any public comment or any questions on anything that we can circle back to. I do want to add too, while we're waiting to see if anybody wanted to provide a comment or questions. The meeting, again, as Jeffrey has mentioned, is recorded. We'll be posting this online too as well, on that same link from the previous page, so you can go back and review the content then, as well as having the slides posted out there too as well. It looks like we're going to be giving back some time. We wanted to make sure we had allotted for questions and comments, especially while we were going through that intense content that both Randy and Ian delivered today. So again, if you go back and review the information and want to reach out for any feedback, we're happy to receive that and provide some comments back for you if you need that at that time.
Awesome. And so thanks, Stephanie. I do just want to reiterate that public comment is a time for anybody to weigh in on topics that we've shared during today's conversation or other topics, whether that's a question, comment, or feedback. So we'll just give folks a few moments. Okay, I don't see any chat happening or anybody coming off of mute, so let's jump to the next slide, please. And I guess that was actually the end of today's conversation. I do want to thank everybody for the time this morning. It's always great to have the dialogue, whether that occurs in chat, whether that occurs verbally. We appreciate you for joining us today. I know that you're all very busy and you do. This is important. So we really appreciate you coming and engaging with Pacific Power in these engagement spaces. Any last comments from you, Stephanie, before we break?
I will just say the same thing as you did. Thank you everyone for your time. And again, we look forward to having our next engagement space that we're targeting for mid-May. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.